Okay, hi everyone. We are getting ready for Rosh Hashanah. Tomorrow night is the big day. The Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, used to call it Nacht, or Coronation Night, when we coronate God as our King. And it's a very auspicious time. And there are, as we'll see here, two different aspects of Rosh Hashanah which we will take a look at. Rosh Hashanah is the new year, is the day of judgment for all men's needs, material and spiritually, for the coming year. Jews therefore pray in Rosh Hashanah to be blessed with children, life, and prosperity. Bana chaya mezona revicha. And on Rosh Hashanah, people come from different aspects of life, whether if they come regularly to shul every Shabbos or every day, or they only come 3 times a week, 3 times a year, 2 days Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Everybody comes together. And why is it that many people come just on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Well, they come because they feel a connection to God. They feel a connection to their people. After all, what is a Jew supposed to do on Rosh Hashanah? Be in shul. That's what Jews do. Whether they were religious or not religious, every Jew comes to shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's the thing we do. They may not be able to read Hebrew. They may not be able to know what's going on, but they know one thing. It's Rosh Hashanah. And on Rosh Hashanah, you come to shul. You may just sit there, as they say, like a lachen cup, like a hole in your head, but you come to shul. That's what you do. And in many cases, we come to shul because we need something. We're in need of something. Either our business is not going so well, our marriage isn't going so well, we want children, or we want our children to behave themselves better, or whatever it may be. But people come to shul with needs, and they come and they ask God for those, to fulfill those needs. Now it's interesting that in Judaism, the actual biblical commandment of prayer is not praying 3 times a day. That's rabbinical, that's from the rabbis. But the actual obligation of prayer is if you need something. Not if you want something, but if you need something. If you need something, we're told, ask God for it. God wants us to ask Him for it. And therefore, in Rosh Hashanah, every Jew is like that. We all need something. So what do? We come to God, and we ask God to fulfill our needs. And those needs are usually in the realm of children, in one way or another, our life, which is health, chaya, or as they say, health, or mezona revicha, or sustenance, parnasa, making a living. Those are the 3 basic elements of life. And we also want success in our spiritual endeavors as well. We want to be good with God and good with the universe. So we come with that at the same time. Rosh Hashanah is a day in which Jews coronate God as our king, as they said, king of the whole world, accepting upon themselves His absolute sovereignty. Accordingly, the theme of many of Rosh Hashanah's prayers deal with God's reign over the world and its inhabitants. Now, this seems like a contradiction. If you're coming to coronate God as king, what do your prayers for your own particular needs have to do with anything? That's not what we're all about. I mentioned in a video I gave this week of a simple person who comes to the king in the middle of the king's coronation. And the king is being coronated. If you've seen pictures of what a coronation looks like, for example, we have pictures of Queen Elizabeth's coronation, how grand and beautiful, with carriages drawn by horses and fancy ceremonies in Westminster Chapel and all kinds of things. And can you imagine a poor, simple person comes up to Queen Elizabeth and says to her, "Excuse me, Mrs., but there's a pothole in front of my house, and every day I trip over that pothole. You're the queen. Can you please fix that pothole?" Well, it seems kind of funny, but can you imagine the idea? Well, on one hand, the queen or the king is the king, and their job is to fill potholes and to take care of the needs of the realm. On the other hand, this is not the time to discuss personal needs of a pothole. This is a celebration. This is a party we're having. It's a wonderful event where the king is becoming the king. Let your pothole situation be later, not now. It's not appropriate right now. So why then are we coming to God with asking him for our prayers for our own particular needs? It's not really the time. It's not really the place. On the other hand, that's exactly what we do. So this seems to be a paradox. It seems to be a contradiction. The Rebbe says praying for prosperity is a very different matter than participating in a coronation. You want to be more successful financially? This is not really the time. Come on, join together in the celebration, in the coronation. That's what it's all about. Indeed, they necessitate conflicting attitudes in the participants. A coronation, he says, forges a new relationship between king and people, that of ruler and subject. This person is now becoming the ruler, becoming the king. And you are now the subject. A true subject in service to his king may entertain no independent actions. You will become one, completely one in your action, your speech, and your thoughts with the king. In fact, the king and you become as one. For example, today we don't really understand the whole idea of a king in reality. They say that the last great king in the world was Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. He was a king. Even though he was cruel and ruthless, but he was a king. And in fact, we lost a true analogy in Torah of what a king really is when he was assassinated. In olden days, a king was a king. If a king decreed that you were to die, you died. If a king wanted your daughter for a wife, you gave her your daughter. You gave him your daughter. If a king wanted to confiscate your land, he confiscated whatever the king wanted. Whatever the king did was not subject to any question at all. The king was the king, and he was an absolute monarch in every respect. Today's kings and queens are not absolute monarchs. They are figureheads. They are heads of state, but they have no real power, not like the old days. God is seen as an absolute monarch, a totally absolute monarch in the way, but a good absolute monarch, I should say. Anyways, so a true subject is completely subjugated, as they say, he's a subject, he's subjugated to the will and the desires of his monarch or her monarch. He discards his own identity. His whole being is devoted to the king. The king, from his side, is motivated to accept the crown when his people display their desire to truly accept his rulership and his loyal subjects, that to obey and serve the king, they are prepared and willing to forego their own wants. For the king's subjects, a coronation is a subjugation of the self. That's what a coronation really is. For example, when the Jewish people came to Shmuel and they asked him for a king, they wanted a king like every other nation. So Shmuel explained to them, kings, they can do all kinds of things, what they want and everything. And the people said, in spite of it, we want a king. Did they know that they were going to be taxed to provide a king with his castle and his horses and all of his luxurious items? If you've ever been to England and you go through Buckingham Palace, you see what kind of luxury the kings and queens live in. Who pays for that? The subjects pay for it. Why would I want to have to pay for a beautiful palace like Buckingham Palace for a family that I have not even met? I don't even know. They're not even related to me. Why? Because they're the king, they're the queen. You want a king and a queen, you got to provide for them. And you have to make sure everything is regal and everything is beautiful and everything is the way it should be. That's what a king and a queen is. That's what you do. So our job is to obey the rule of the king and to accept their rulership, even though it may impede our own lifestyle. It may take away money from our pockets and time from our lives, and even worse. But in order to have a king, If you want a king, that's what you get. That's how it's done. And everything belongs to the king. We belong to the king, our families belong to the king, and everything we've got belongs to the king in that scenario. So if that's the situation, why are we asking for our own personal needs? We should have no personal needs, none whatsoever. No one must have a sense of self to be conscious of and pray for one's own needs. At the coronation, certainly, we should only be connected to the king. And even after the coronation, we should recognize the fact that we do not own ourselves, but everything we have is the king's. My arm is the king's arm. My head is the king's head. My feet are the king's feet. So how can I take my hand and do something improper with my hand? I have no right to do that. It's not my hand. How can I take my mouth and eat something which is not appropriate for me to eat? It's not my mouth. It's not my body. I have no right to use my body for a way that the king would not allow, would not approve of. It's not my body. It's not my mouth. It's the king's. Everything I have belongs to the king. So why do we come along and pray for our own personal needs? We have no personal needs. So the Rebbe continues, prayer on Rosh Hashanah then involves two contradictory modes. A Jew needs to be conscious of his wants. We do have wants after all. We have basic needs that we have. Simultaneously, those wants must be subdued and in fact be non-existent. How are we to resolve this paradox? On one hand, we have needs, wants, desires. On the other hand, we need to subjugate them completely to the king, to God. God is truly crowned as king when all recognize his sovereignty. There's an expression, Ein melech b'li am. There is no king without a people. Who is it that makes the king the king? The people do. If the people choose not to make him the king anymore, he's not the king anymore. When the Shah of Iran came across tremendous opposition in the 1970s, he fled his country to America, and he spent his dying days, his last years, in America. Was he still the Shah? He claimed he was, but he really wasn't. Why? Because the people took it away from him. People said, we don't want you anymore to be our king. So you are not our king anymore. In fact, the Shah, in many respects, was very much of an absolute monarch. But people said, no, we don't want you anymore to be our king. At the moment that people decide that, he will not be king anymore. There is a movement underway in England to destroy the monarchy, to make the monarchy non-existent anymore. And many people feel, what do we need a monarchy for? This is a modern day and age. We have democracy, we have representation in government. Why do we need a monarchy? What does a monarchy do for us? Well, most people still believe in the monarchy. They feel they want it. It's royal, it's beautiful, it's meaningful in whatever case it may be. America denied the idea of monarchy. We said when we were founded, we didn't want a king anymore. We had presidents, not kings. Even though sometimes our presidents act like kings in certain respects, but they're not kings. They're subject to the rule of law, and we chose not to have a king. At the moment that we choose not to have a king, he's not our king anymore. So on Rosh Hashanah, we are deciding. We are the ones who are making God our king. It's our decision to do that. God is only crowned when we recognize his sovereignty. The realization of the Rosh Hashanah prayer of rule over the whole world in your glory, in turn, God's majesty and presence is evident in the world when its subjects are used for godly, holy purposes. When we are used for godly, holy purposes, we make God our king. God is revealed as king when godliness is revealed in the world. If godliness is not revealed in the world, then God is not our king. We're saying, we don't want you anymore to be our king. But the truth is, we do want God to be our king. In this grand design of transforming this hitherto mundane world into a fit abode for God, in which the Jews play a central role, after all, we are God's main servants here in the world. We're the ones that God empowered to have a very important, vital role in the world. Every Jew has his allotted part. Every Jew has their job to do. To each Jew there pertains certain objects, which it is their mission and theirs alone to transform into godliness by using them for holy purposes. God has placed each one of us, every single Jew, into a particular situation in the world that we are supposed to elevate that situation and make that situation godly. Whatever our situation may be. We may be a holy rabbi, or we may be a ditch digger. Our job is, in our position, in our place in the world, to bring godliness, to bring holiness into that particular situation in our own personal life. And every single one of us is vital in the ultimate plan that God has for the world. Every single one of us in our own way. It's something incredible to think about. So therefore, this is the true motivation for our prayers of Rosh Hashanah. We are praying to God for certain things, for children, for livelihood, for parnasa, but we're not praying for ourselves. We are praying that this should be a vehicle to bring godliness into the world. We are saying to God, God, please help me to make your presence felt more in the world through my children, through my health, my body and my physical being, through my job, and through my money, whatever it may be. It's not that we're not asking for these things for personal benefit. We are asking them for God's benefit, because the world belongs to God and God is the king. So just as a servant comes to their master and says, Master, please enable me the ability to serve you better. For example, let's say a servant is a farmer. A servant is given a job to go out there and till the ground and make things grow. So the servant comes to the king or the master and says to the master, Your Majesty, I accept your job responsibility, but I need tools to be able to fulfill it. I need help. I need more water, or I need more seeds to plant things, or whatever the needs be. If you don't give me those things, I can't fulfill your plan. I can't do what you want me to do. It's not that I'm doing it for me personally. I'm doing it for you, and therefore we are asking God to give us those things that we need to fulfill God's will on this world. So that really explains the contradiction here, that we are making God our king, and we are asking God for the ability, for the things that we need to fulfill being his subjects and to do what he wants us to do. They are not, the Rebbe says, they are not prayers for personal gratification, but prayers to be granted those material objects with which to carry out one's allotted part in the task of revealing godliness in the world. And this is a beautiful, profound idea. When we coronate God as our king, we are saying, we accept your sovereignty over us. And we accept the fact that we will do our very best to be a loyal subject to you. Not for ourselves, but for you. This is what we are willing to do and prepared to do for you. God is the ultimate king. He's the Melech Malchei Hamlochim, the king of all kings. And God is a kind, benevolent ruler to us. And God wants what is good for us. But ultimately what we want is what's good for God. So God says, I want to help you. A Jew should say, God, I want to help you. I want to make you. You know, as JFK used to say, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So in this case, we want to do for our country. We want to do for God. And a way to do that is by praying to God and asking God for those things that we need in order to pray, to serve him. That's what we're doing. The paradox is thus resolved. The prayers on Rosh Hashanah for material or even spiritual plenty stem not from consciousness of one's own personal wants, not because of something we want personally, but from the selfless desire to carry out one's God-given mission. It is but a further step in the proclamation of God as King. So that's what we want. That's what we are praying for on the holiday. But the Rebbe asks a question. He says, isn't this a very rare situation? How many people could really do that? How many people could say, God, I don't care for that cruise on the Nile or the Mediterranean. I don't care for a lot of money in my life or not new car or things like that. I don't care for these things. Most of us, of course, we do care for these things and we want these things. So mostly, we do want these things. And it's very difficult for us to say, no, I'm going to give up all of these things for you. I don't want any of those things myself. I only want them in a way that I can serve you. Only very few, very highly spiritually exalted people could possibly be at a level like that. The Rosh Hashanah prayers, which were written by our sages, are for all Jews, not just the holy tzaddikim or the great rabbis or anything like that. Not all Jews can honestly say that when they pray for material prosperity, it's purely for the sake of carrying out God's purpose. I think that rabbis, in many cases, are people who are those rarefied people who say, I'm going to give up all of my basic needs, desires, and everything in order to completely serve God. For that reason, I think all rabbis, are to be respected and emulated for the sacrifice that they make in order to fulfill a high godly purpose. But most people aren't rabbis, and most people can't be at that level to give up all of their physical needs and desires and everything to serve God. The difficulty is not that it's impossible to refrain from praying for one's needs, for one's wants, instead to concentrate solely on God's coronation. So the Rebbe is saying here, listen, we understand perfect. No one is at such a lofty level. But one thing is for sure, there's a coronation going on. And let's join in the coronation. The coronation, or Rosh Hashanah, is the time when a Jew, any Jew, every Jew, at every level can draw close to God, forget all else, be gripped with a burning desire to be together with the King. Every Jew, at least in the coronation, every Jew can be at that level. You know, we take 3-4 hours of our time on a morning and we spend the time in shul. That itself is a tremendous sacrifice. Most of us would prefer being in the golf course or going to the movies or going to a restaurant and having a nice meal instead of spending 3 hours in shul, don't understand and being cooped up in whatever it may be. Most people would not prefer that, but every Jew does that. Why do we do that? Why do we spend 25 hours of our precious time fasting on Yom Kippur? Who wants to fast? Not me, but we do. We spend the whole day, we are exhausted, we are hungry, but we do it anyways. And every single Jew does it, whether they're religious or not, whether they're a rabbi or a common folk or whoever they may be. We all do these things. So the difficulty is not that it's impossible to refrain from praying for one's needs, but rather the difficulty is that all Jews, even the most ordinary, apparently, are to perform contradictory services simultaneously. We're required to think about our own needs and to desire God to fulfill them. But that same desire is to be unsullied by personal motives. So what we're trying to do is take away the personal motives and learn to devote ourselves to a higher purpose. And that higher purpose is seen in many ways. When a man comes home from a long day at work, exhausted and tired, and their wife demands time and attention from them, and perhaps to do some chores around the house, the husband doesn't want to do that. The husband just wants to sit in front of the TV set and drink a beer or have a nice meal and go to sleep. That's what the husband wants to do. But he doesn't do that. He spends the time, he sits down, he puts the newspaper down, he talks to his wife, He spends time with her. He listens to her concerns and her day. Why does he do that? He doesn't really want to do that, but he does want to do that because that's what she wants from him. And if he wants to be married, and if he wants a wife, and he wants all of the things that a wife gives to him and gives to his family, he will subjugate his own desires to her desires. And that makes a successful marriage. When you're able to put down your desires for her desires, then you are a giver, not a taker. And that makes a successful marriage in every respect. A Jew, however, is a composite of body and soul. The soul is considered a chelik elokah mimal, mamish, a actual portion of God above. That's our soul. Our soul does not have one physical desire in it, not one. The soul doesn't care for food. The soul doesn't care for health or welfare or any of these things. The soul only cares for God. The Baal Shem Tov taught the body's hunger for food and thirst, for drink, derived from the spiritual hunger of the soul inhabiting the body. Why does a body want food and drink? Because it is an analogy of the soul wanting spirituality, wanting godliness. And the food and drink represents godliness. So just as the body, the soul wants godliness, the body wants food and drink. Within the food and drink, as within everything in the world, there are sparks of holiness in everything we do. That's why in Judaism, every mitzvah is connected with physical things. Food, things we drink, clothes we wear, mitzvahs we do, such as tefillin or tzitzis or whatever it may be. All of these things have to do with physical things, food and physical things in the world. And by using those physical things, we elevate them and we release the sparks of godliness found in them, of which the soul hungers. The soul is also hungry. The person may feel only the physical hunger, but in reality, the body's hunger is really the soul's hunger as well. The soul wants to release the sparks of godliness found in that particular physical object that we are drawn towards, that we want. Sometimes you come home and you say, what's for lunch today? What would I like for lunch today? That happens to me sometimes. I come home, do I want eggs or do I want a salami sandwich? Do I want a cheese omelet or do I want a hamburger? I'm not sure. And if you think to yourself, what do I really want? So your body will tell you what you really would like. And this satisfies you. If you want one thing, but you decide to get something else, you really don't want that. You come home, your wife will say, what do you want for dinner tonight? So if you say, I think I'd like lasagna, and she makes instead a pot roast, you don't want a pot roast. You want lasagna. Your body is telling you you want lasagna. Of course, I don't know anybody who would prefer lasagna over pot roast, but that's only me personally. But the fact is that it is an analogy to your soul wanting something, to elevate that particular object. Why is it that you want the pot roast? Because you want to elevate the godly sparks found in the pot roast. That's why you are drawn towards that particular thing. Do you want to play golf? Why do you want to play golf? Because you enjoy golf? Because you, in a deep subconscious way, in a very deep spiritual way, you want to elevate the godliness found at the golf course. How is godliness found in the golf course? By camaraderie, A'Havat Israel, dealing with your fellow Jew, having what to do, sharing words of wisdom and Torah thoughts, and family with the people that you are golfing with, being honest in your score. That's a big problem for a lot of people. Taking care of your body, making it healthy by walking out there on the course and stretching and the sunshine and the good air, the clean air that's outside, and it's simply just relaxing and not being so much involved with your business and the day-to-day grind of your business. It can be a very relaxing experience. I've never done that before, but I can imagine what it's like. So I would not criticize somebody who goes out and goes golfing. That his body is telling him to do it, but at the same time his soul is also telling him to do it. The soul is telling us what the body is telling us what our soul wants. The above is parallel. This is paralleled by the narrative of Chana. On Rosh Hashanah, the Haftorah on Rosh Hashanah is the prayer of Chana. We are told that Chana came, for many years she had no children, and she wanted a child. So she went into the Mishkan, the temple in Shiloh, which was in Shiloh at the time, and she went there and she prayed to God. But her prayer was a very, very deep felt prayer. Her lips were moving, but no words were coming out. And Eli, the high priest, saw her and didn't hear any words coming out of her mouth. So he criticized her. He said, "You're drunk. Seems to me you're drunk. Your words, you're saying words with your lips, but I don't hear any prayers coming out." So he thought that she was drunk, because her prayer was of such a deep prayer that's what it appeared. So the Rebbe says the Chana, childless for many years, went to Shiloh, and there she prayed at length to God, weeping profusely. So she made a vow that if God would bless her with a son, she would give him to God all the days of his life. That was her promise. At the end, she had a child who was Shmuel. Eli, the high priest, was watching her, and because Chana was speaking to herself so that only her lips moved but her voice could not be heard, he thought she was drunk, and he rebuked her. He said, "Why do you come into the holy temple appearing drunk? It's not appropriate. It's not right to do that." Chana replied, "It is not so, my lord. I have drunk neither new wine nor old wine, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord." I'm praying to God. It may seem to you like I'm drunk, but I'm not. Eli then blessed her, that the God of Israel would grant your request that you have asked of him. Eli did not think Chana was literally drunk. If we take a look at the story a little bit deeper, he didn't actually think she was drunk with wine. But because Chana prayed at such length, he thought her drunk with prayer, which he believed was unseemly behavior in the sanctuary. Didn't think it was appropriate. It didn't seem normal to him. It would be like a person coming into shul and jumping up and down and being wild and screaming and yelling, these types of things. And that's their prayer. Well, it's nice that they're praying like that, but it's unseemly. It's not appropriate to come into shul and to conduct yourself in such a way because you're before the king. You don't act that way before a king. It's humiliating. It's embarrassing. It's not something you should do. You have to use humility and decorum. When one is standing before God, one should be cognizant of nothing but God. By jumping up and waving your hands and jumping up and down, it's more about you than it is about God. It's about you having an ecstatic experience rather than actually serving God. It is not the place for requesting one's own needs, however praiseworthy those may be. Chana's desperate desire for a child, he thought, had led her to forget that she stood before God. Chana wanted a child. So by acting in such a way, she appeared to be more for herself and less for God. But Eli was wrong. Chana told him that I have poured out my soul before God. She was not drunk with her own desires. She didn't want a child for her own sake. She wanted a child to serve God. That's why she wanted a child. Eli thought, well, she wanted a child, so that's why she was acting in such a way. No. Her lengthy prayer was an outpouring from the innermost recesses of the soul, that part of the soul that is one with God. there no personal desires exist. There is no more fitting place for prayer that stems from there than before God. Many years ago, I sat at a table, a Shabbos table, with a man who was a doctor in Toronto, many years ago. And he shared with me his incredible story, how he and his wife were childless for many, many years. And they were told by the local rabbi to go to New York and go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and ask the Rebbe for a bracha for a child. If you want a child, the Rebbe should give you a bracha to have a child. So that's what they did. They went to the Rebbe, and actually they went to the Rebbe on Simchas Torah. And they went, and somehow they were able to get an audience with the Rebbe, to meet with the Rebbe privately. And they poured out their soul, him and his wife, to the Rebbe. Again, the man told me the story. They poured out their soul to the Rebbe. We want a child. Please grant us a child. And the Rebbe said to him, remarkably, what are you prepared to do for me? Well, the man said, I'll give a major donation to Chabad. The Rebbe said, I'm not interested in your money. The man didn't know what else to say. Well, what do you want? The Rebbe said, I want your child. Well, the Rebbe was childless his whole life. The man thought, the Rebbe wants my child. Why? He doesn't have a child, so he wants to adopt my child. Is that what the Rebbe wanted? But then the Rebbe said, this is what I want you to do. When the child turns 13, I want you to bring him to New York, and I want you to let me decide his education from then on. That's what I want you to do. Are you prepared to do that? Now, today, many religious families who live out of town do just that. I personally have done that with most of my kids when they turned 13, 14 years old. We sent them off to learn in yeshivas. We didn't have any yeshivas in San Diego at the time. So we sent them off. We were prepared for that almost from the day they were born. It was something that we realized and something was necessary. But for a person who is not so religious, a person who lives out of town, to do that is a tremendous act of self-sacrifice. The Rebbe asked him, are you prepared to do that? Entrust your child to me for his education, to raise him. Are you prepared to do that? The man looked the Rebbe in the eye, and looked his wife in the eye. And the two of them nodded their head. And they said, yes, we agreed to do that. Can you imagine that? We agreed to do that. The Rebbe said, therefore you will have a child. 9 months later, they gave birth to a beautiful child, a baby boy. And they were ecstatic, and they were so happy. And they raised the child. And they sent the child to a Jewish day school in Toronto. And when the child became 13, they brought the child to the Rebbe in New York, not believing that the Rebbe was actually going to fulfill the promise, or even remember the promise that he asked this man to give to him. He brought him to New York to celebrate his bar mitzvah and to celebrate Simchas Torah. And they went to see the Rebbe for a bracha, as many people do on their birthday. And it was because it was around that time, it was his birthday, Simchas Torah. They went to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe, this was 13 years later, the Rebbe immediately remembered what he asked this man to promise in order to have this bracha. The man was shocked. He went with his wife. They were shocked. The Rebbe said, are you prepared to honor the promise you made to me? What's he going to say? He said, yes. He said, yes. The Rebbe said, I want your child to enroll in the Lubavitcher Rebbe here in Brooklyn, in New York. He'll stay in the dormitory. I'll watch over him. We'll make sure that all of his needs are taken care of. And everything should be well. And that's what he did. The man did that. He sent his child to Lubavitcher Rebbe in New York, and the boy grew up an Orthodox boy, a religious boy. So the doctor, the man who told me the story, he asked me what do you think of that. I said, this is the story of Hannah and Eli. This is exactly the same story. And the child that was born from this situation turned out to be one of the greatest prophets of all time. Shmuel, who coronated the king Saul, and then later coronated David, and who was one of the great prophets of Judaism. It's an incredible story. Hannah's prayer for a son then was not for herself but for God. Indeed, she had vowed in her prayer, "I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life." And that son was the prophet Shmuel. She actually gave she gave Shmuel to the temple after she weaned him, probably 2-3 years old. Can you imagine a mother giving over her son at that age? The narrative of Hannah provides a clear lesson concerning Jews' prayers on Rosh Hashanah, as we mentioned earlier. Rosh Hashanah, when God is crowned king of the world, is not the appropriate time for consideration of one's needs for their own sake. The narrative of Hannah, however, teaches that the prayers of every Jew contain more than just superficial requesting of one's own needs. Not just, please God, give me a Corvette. It's inappropriate. It's not appropriate. It's not what we are there for. They are the outpourings of the inner soul, which is one with God. One should pray for. You can pray for God's needs on Rosh Hashanah, but in truth, it is their essence. Those prayers are cries from the soul to carry out its mission of making this world into a dwelling place for God. That's really what we're asking for on Rosh Hashanah. And in so doing, we are indeed coronating God our King, and we're saying, God, it's your world, you're the King, I am your subject, I'm here for you, and everything I have is for you. If you will give me what I need this coming year, I promise you that I will sanctify it and I'll dedicate it to you. And if we make that promise to God, then our prayers, God willing, should be answered. I want to wish you all a ksima tova. May you be written and inscribed for a good year. As the Rebbe always used to say, Ashana Tova Masuka, a good and a sweet year to you and to your loved ones and to all of mankind. Shalom. Yoram?
Shkoch, thank you.